The Gloriana said, by ThebeMoon. Read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 18. Gryffindor versus Slytherin. You call this a potions lab? It was Saturday morning, and Malfoy stood in the doorway of the tiny, narrow room, unimpressed. Light filtered weakly through the lab-single grimy window. Rusted chains hung from the ceiling, and half-melted red candles appeared to drip blood on every surface. A scarred mahogany cabinet dominated the far wall, its door hanging drunkenly from broken hinges. A table shoved against the right-hand wall, holding 3 cobweb-shrouded cauldrons, while a high rickety shelf lined the opposite side. Hermione, on the other hand, was beaming. "It's perfect," she said, as Malfoy shut the door behind them. "It's just a doorway from Stockholm, yet separate from the main potions dungeon, so he has deniability if we blow ourselves up." "Charming," Malfoy said. "We should get your squeaky mouse club to sort this out." "No need for that," Hermione said, poking around the dusty drawers on the shelves. "A few cleaning spells." She stopped to look up at him. "You do know cleaning spells, don't you?" Malfoy shrugged. "Of course you don't," she said, giving him a rather reptilian stare. "You've always had oppressed house elves without proper pay or benefits." "Don't start spooking on me." "Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare." "Nobody is abusing house elves at Malfoy Manor," Malfoy said. "My father's treatment of Dobby was one of his convictions, if you recall. Even if my mother and I wanted to harm an elf, it would be incredibly stupid. They are well treated." "But they are not free." Malfoy rolled his eyes. "A Department of Magical Creature officials offered them freedom right after the war, tried to give them the Ministry of Magic sweatshirts, and the elves cried for a week." "But if it was presented in the right way—" "Drop it, Granger." "Fine," she huffed. "Get your wand out, then. I'm not cleaning this room alone." Hermione gave her own wand a small flick. "Scourgify," she said, and the dust vanished from half the table. "Scourgify," Malfoy said in a bored tone, and the table's other half was wiped clean as well. Hermione moved closer to the table's largest cauldron, brushing Malfoy's arm, and there was the sound of smashing glass. She looked over her shoulder. Malfoy had bumped into the shelves, and the back of his Slytherin Quidditch jersey was now covered in green slime and shards of glass. "Malfoy, you spilled all the pickled toad!" Hermione raised her wand, chanting, "Tergeo!" and the charm siphoned the toad guts off his back. "Don't forget the little tap, it's very important." She turned back to the cauldron, holding up her lit wand to see crawling mass of spiders inside. "Eek!" she said, flinching away. She brushed Malfoy again, and he crashed into the broken cabinet this time, sending both doors to the floor with a clatter. "Malfoy, what's wrong with you?" she demanded. "I'm fine," he snapped, siphoning the dust off his jersey and hair. He gave the cabinet an appraising look, then cleared it of dust as well. Lowering his wand, he ran his hand over the cabinet's interior and across the top, then raised his wand again and began a series of complicated waves. Standing behind Malfoy, Hermione craned her neck to see the cabinet practically repairing itself. Malfoy's intricate handwork continued as he muttered spells under his breath. In no time at all, the Slytherin had expertly reattached the cabinet doors and installed a new transfigured wooden panel and claw foot. The cabinet now looked brand new, probably better than new, its mahogany finish glowing softly. Malfoy lowered his wand and stood still, his back tense. Hermione said nothing, just turned back to the cauldrons, ignoring the sudden ache in her chest. She had to score the cauldrons down the metal, stripping away layers of grime and failed potions. By the time she'd finished, Malfoy had finished cleaning and repairing the window above the cabinet, now propped half open to let in the warm outside breeze. "Malfoy, do you need any—" Hermione began, stepping closer, and he jerked sideways, slamming into the cabinet again. She bit her lip to avoid a smile. "Relax, Malfoy," she said, touching his sleeve. "It's all right." "Oh, perfectly relaxed," he snapped, but he did stop trying to destroy the furniture. With 2 wands at work, the rest of the room was spotless clean in no time, with the shelves dusted and sorted and all 3 cauldrons spider-free. But no amount of cleaning made the laboratory any bigger, and its 2 occupants were forced to stand close together at the table. A draught from the window brought that warm sunshine scent with the faintest trace of cologne. "It's time to look at the ingredients," she said. a bit more coldly than she'd intended. "Please hand me my bag and don't open it." Malfoy looked offended. "I thought you trusted me again." "I trust you not to write murderous threats in blood, Malfoy. It's not a high bar." "You always knew I didn't write those messages," he said, giving her the bag. "You were testing me. That was quite Slytherin, quite dangerous." "Well, I didn't expect you to run off to take Veritaserum," Hermione said, spreading out her parchment. "Desperate times," he murmured. "Desperate? You?" She strove to keep her tone even. This was a very small room. "Terribly desperate," he said into her hair. "Malfoy?" Malfoy stepped back slightly, crossing his arms and leaning against the cabinet. He looked down his nose at her. "You're wasting time with Theo, Granger. You think he'll be any easier to manage? A smiling, scrubbed-up, more palatable version of what you really want?" "Never presume again to know what I want, Malfoy," Hermione said, her voice purposely cold this time. "I am far from over what happened in the charms classroom, and I am not your plaything either." "Of course not. You're something better," Malfoy smirked. "I now have my own little war hero. Merlin, if you could have seen yourself bursting into McGonagall's office like an angry lioness, defending me tooth and claw. Oh, the look on Potterhead's face!" "Don't call him that, and I thought you didn't like me fixing things for you." "I don't like you fixing things behind my back," he responded, uncrossing his arms and pointing a long finger at her. "But feel free to continue leaping into situations, yelling and defending my honor. It's very arousing. Someday they'll come to drag you off to Azkaban for littering, and I won't do a thing about it," she promised. "But until that happy event arrives, do me a favor and look this recipe and ingredients list. We'll need to gather a few things in the Forbidden Forest." "Bloodroot, acromental venom." He moved to her side and scanned the parchment, frowning. "What exactly are we brewing here, Granger?" "I call it blood absiety, or blood identity potion. If we do it right, it will help us identify the animal or person who provided the blood in the message." Malfoy set down the parchment and looked down at her again. He was uncomfortably close. "What?" she asked. "Where did you get this recipe?" he asked sternly. "It wavers on the edge of dark magic." "Nowhere. I created it." "Have you tested it?" She shifted nervously. No. That's why it's called experimental." He eyed her again without speaking, his face unusually serious. "What?" "Sometimes you frighten me, Granger," Malfoy said. "Potterhead may have been the chosen one, but he had a savior too, and I'm looking at her." Hermione stared up at him, her throat suddenly tight. "That's nonsense." "Don't be so sure." He looked down at the ingredients list and returned to his usual light tone. "I assume that brutish gamekeeper of yours will help us find this lot. His name is Professor Hagrid, and yes, he will." She glowered at him. "And you will treat Hagrid with respect, or I'll do this alone." Malfoy waved a hand. Yes. Care to tell me why we need 6 bushels of clover blossoms?" Hermione coughed. "It's, for, the odor." Malfoy raised an eyebrow. "We have to put something in there, or the potion will smell like rotting meat. We might need more than 6 bushels, actually, and I'm putting you on clover-picking duty, Malfoy, for insulting Hagrid." She expected him to protest, but he merely nodded, which meant he was up to something. She opened her mouth to ask, but decided she didn't want to know. "This takes 2 or 3 weeks to brew?" Malfoy asked. "Yes." He sat the list down. "All right, I have to go to the Quidditch pitch. You'll be at today's match?" "Of course," she said airily. "I'll be there for Ginny." She picked a jar of lizard hearts from the shelf and shook it. They didn't look very fresh. So you say." Malfoy brushed past her and opened the door. He turned to look at her, his hair backlit by the light from the main dungeon. "So you say," he repeated with a thin smile. "But you'll be watching me. And contrary to my usual preferences, do try to control yourself today, Granger. Don't go running out on the pitch if I get injured throwing hexes and whatnot. Would not look good defending a Slytherin, no matter how fascinating." He noticed Hermione's hand tighten on the jar and managed to slip out before she had a chance to throw it. "I am a pond," she told herself. "I am a fucking unruffled pond." It was a perfect day for Quidditch, unreasonably warm with a gentle wind. Hermione and Neville had prime seats on the north side of the pitch, which had been rebuilt after the Battle of Hogwarts. The whole school had packed the stands for the first match of the season. Hermione congratulated herself for turning down McGonagall's offer to be head girl or even prefect, or she'd be patrolling right now and confiscating Weasley's Wizarding Wheeze product. Instead, she was relaxing with Neville, who also had a hazy grasp of Quidditch and didn't mind if she said wacky faint, among a crowd of Gryffindors who were wildly cheering even though nothing had happened yet. Ginny was huddled with her team on the south end of the pitch. Most of the Slytherin players were in the air, practicing looping plays, leaving only Malfoy and Astoria on their side of the pitch in close discussion. "Here, Hermione," Neville said in an undertone. He pulled 2 butterbeers from under his thin cloak. "Neville, you shouldn't," she scolded, but she took the bottle anyway. Yes, she was very glad not to be head girl. Sipping her butterbeer, Hermione tried to enjoy the sun on her face and not fret about the blood potion ingredients she could be gathering. Malfoy and Astoria were still talking, facing each other about 2 feet apart. Glossy brooms in hand, Astoria obviously giving last-minute instructions. They made, Hermione had to admit, a striking couple. Both pale, tall, and slender, with sleek, shining hair of gold and platinum. Astoria's hair was worked into a long, intricate braid down her back, woven with green ribbons. Malfoy was bent slightly toward her, listening attentively and occasionally nodding. A prince and his princess in green and silver. He could win her again, Hermione was certain. He could easily restore his family name among the purebloods. He was still handsome and rich after all. The rest of the wizarding world might not matter to him. Give it a few years, and it would be like Voldemort had never risen, like the death and destruction and terror never happened, at least in his gilded world, so long as Lucius stayed in Azkaban. Whispers would always follow Draco and his pureblood lady, but never truly touch their lives. "What's wrong, Hermione?" Neville asked. "You look a little sick." "It's the flies," she said quickly, nodding at Ron, who she just noticed had pulled out of a deep dive and was looping past him with a wave. "All that swooping and spinning." Malfoy kicked off away from Astoria and immediately launched into a corkscrew-like trajectory straight up into the air, then took the same swirling path down again. "Show off," Hermione muttered, then groaned as she saw Ron attempt the same move. He was a strong flyer, but nowhere near so graceful. Malfoy snickered, then made a cheeky pass by the Gryffindor stands, bowing at the booze. "Did Malfoy just wink at you?" Neville asked. "Certainly not." "Well, he wasn't winking at me." "I don't know," Hermione teased. "You two seem awfully chummy in herbology." "Not as chummy as you and Malfoy in potions. Is it true you're brewing something with him in the practice lab?" Hermione looked at her friend, surprised. Word did get around quickly. "Yes, actually, we're working on some experimental potions." "He's been decent this year so far, for Malfoy anyway," Neville said. "Hasn't insulted me once. Creepy." "It won't last," she said. Neville nodded in agreement and took another swig of butterbeer. Madame Hooch released a snitch, and immediately the players swirled into action. Malfoy was in rare form, his flying drawing cheers from the Slytherins and even some impressed growls from the Gryffindors. Not the worst way to win over his own house, Hermione thought. A lot would be forgiven if he helped them win the Quidditch Cup. She shook her head. Slytherins won the Quidditch Cup? Terrible notion. She pulled her eyes away from Malfoy's graceful circles and watched Ron make another clumsy but effective save. Slytherin's beaters were a real pair of thugs, almost comically large on their skinny brooms. They seemed to enjoy slamming into people more than hitting badgers with their bats. They followed the Lundy twins like scowling shadows, nearly knocking the Lundy sister off her broom. Ron was catching every quibble. Quacky? Quabby? While the Lundy brothers scored twice as his sister distracted the Slytherin beaters. Keeper Astoria was screaming at her beaters now, a distraction that allowed another score on her, and the Gryffindors cheered wildly. The snitch was nowhere to be found. Ginny tried a few fake dives, but Malfoy refused to bite, simply continuing his sweeping circles. Then his body stiffened, and his circles became tighter. Hermione's eyes narrowed. "He's singing something," she said to Neville. "Malfoy?" he whispered, following her gaze. Malfoy was playing it cool, she could tell. His flying became less casual, and every curve brought him just a bit lower. She squinted, trying to calculate the trajectory. "I think the snitch is by the far hoop," she said. Malfoy broke off to his right, cape flapping, and several things happened at once. Ginny went into a deep dive after him, and Hermione could hear Astoria shrieking orders. The two Slytherin beaters, on opposite sides of the field at the moment, flew at high speed straight for Malfoy and Ginny. "We're going to ambush Ginny," Neville cried. Hermione shook her head. If she didn't know better, she'd think they were aiming for Malfoy, she shouted, her voice lost in the screams of Gryffindors around her. Neville gave her a strange look. The crowd gasped as the snitch shot up, sparking in the sun, passing nearly under Malfoy's nose. He snatched it up and held it close to his chest. A second later, the two Slytherin beaters smashed into him, one from each side. Hermione was on her feet, clutching Neville's hand. "Malfoy!" she shouted again. Crushed between two huge beaters, bearing in at full speed, bats in hand, Malfoy screamed once, and then his body tipped to the side, one arm hanging uselessly, the other still clutched at his chest. One leg flew out at an odd angle, and he lost his broom and began plummeting. Ginny dove after him, her wand out. "Malfoy!" Hermione screeched. "Draco!" Her bottle of butterbeer smashed at her feet, and she groped for her own wand to stop his fall. Malfoy landed with a thud on the pitch. Cursing her slowness, Hermione pointed her wand instead at the Slytherin beaters, who hovered nearby, looking smug. Suddenly they both gasped and clutched their throats. Two strong hands grabbed her arms and forced her wand down. "Hermione, stop it!" Neville yelled in her ear. The beaters, released, flew down to the pitch and fell to their knees, coughing. Astoria and Madame Hooch had reached Malfoy, who now lay on the grass unmoving. Ginny had reached the pitch and was backing out of the way, looking worried. "Get off me!" Hermione shouted, fighting against Neville's hold and struggling to leave her row. "You can't, Hermione." Neville's voice was harsh in her ear. "What's wrong with you? You can't go down there." Her friend grunted as Hermione jerked an elbow into his rib. She pushed out of her row, stepping into the aisle, but Neville's hand caught her arm before she could go any farther. All the stands were in an uproar, with both Slytherins and Gryffindors on their feet and flooding the aisles to get a better look. "Merlin, Hermione, have you lost your mind?" Neville cried. "Stop fighting me! Ow!" Her elbow had connected again, this time with his jaw. "Look, Madame Pomfrey's with him! Ow, shit!" Malfoy was still prone on the grass, utterly still, with Astoria kneeling beside him. The Slytherin beaters continued to cough, although they could breathe now, while the rest of the players, both Gryffindor and Slytherin, stood silently around the pitch. Pomfrey conjured a stretcher and levitated Malfoy onto it. The stretcher floated off the pitch, with Pomfrey and Astoria following. Malfoy was unconscious, and Hermione could see a long pale arm hanging off the stretcher, the snitch slipping out of a nerveless hand and buzzing away. "Hermione, stop struggling!" Neville hissed in her ear. He had both arms around her now, and she couldn't use her wand. "You can't go down there." She suddenly froze, remembering. "Do try to control yourself, Granger. Don't go running out on the pitch if I get injured, throwing hexes and whatnot." "Merlin!" she gasped. "He knew." "Who?" Neville asked. "Malfoy," she said, watching the injured blonde disappear into the castle. "Malfoy knew he was going to be attacked." The mood in the Gryffindor common room was somber that night. Since Malfoy had caught the snitch and managed to retain it all the way to the ground, it was a Slytherin win, despite his injury. Hermione had talked to Theo briefly in the Great Hall after dinner. "I guess it's great we won and all," Theo said. "Big party in the dungeons tonight, but I'd rather take you to Hogsmeade." Theo was no great Quidditch fan. "Any word on Malfoy?" Hermione asked, trying to sound casual. "Astoria's in the infirmary. Draco has shattered bones in his arms and right knee," Theo reported, always in the know. "He'll need a night with Skelligro, but he'll live, no thanks to those two beaters. McGonagall is still screaming at them in her office. They claim somebody choked them afterwards, but nobody knows who." Hermione flushed at the memory of her hexes. What had gotten into her? "I could slip away from the Slytherin party," Theo said, edging closer. "Perhaps a late dessert at that new Hogsmeade restaurant." Hermione shook her head. "I'm sorry, Theo. I should stay with Ginny. This was her first big game as Quidditch captain, and to lose it, Blaise will console her, I'm sure." Theo sat with a glint in his eyes. "Not likely. She won't want to see any Slytherins." Ginny was tough and shrewd, but she was still a hot-tempered Weasley. Theo sighed. "Quidditch. You'd think the Wizarding World turned on every match." Hermione agreed fully. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Ginny was pounding fire whiskey with the team, and Ron was already half drunk. "You want to tell me what happened today?" Neville asked in a low voice, joining her on the sofa by the fire. She sighed. "There's nothing to tell, Nev." Great, Neville said. Then you won't mind if I tell Ginny how you nearly charged a Quidditch pitch after Malfoy was hurt, and how he warned you about a possible attack beforehand. Really, it's nothing. I need him for my experimental potions. Neville nodded. Experimental potions? Okay. He was silent for a moment, then went on. Let me tell you what I've been seeing, Hermione. You and Malfoy brew this crazy trust potion together in class and keep meeting up before ancient runes. Then you two fall out and he shows up at the Gryffindor Tower, shouting to see you and fighting with Ron. Then you make up somehow and start working on experimental potions together, and he's talking to you about attacks from other students. He held her eyes in his surprisingly stern blue ones. And today you practically break my ribs trying to get to him when he was hurt this afternoon. What in Merlin is going on here? You two aren't— No, she said quickly, we're not. Neville looked relieved. I thought you were dating Nott, which is crazy enough. Theo and I aren't dating either. Yet, she said. I did say I'd go to Hogsmeade with him, though. He looked around and lowered his voice. And what about hexing those beaters? That was vicious, Hermione. They couldn't breathe. I don't know what you're— Neville flushed. I know what I saw, Hermione. How far would you have taken it if I hadn't stopped you? Did you see what they— I saw, he said grimly. I saw them, and I saw you. You've been pulling your wand out a lot this year, and I'm not talking about defense against the dark arts. Oh, if you only knew, Nev, Hermione thought. McGonagall's out for blood, wanting to know who hexed those beaters, Neville went on. It doesn't look very good for inter-house unity. Inter-house unity? Hermione snorted. What about house unity? Malfoy was attacked by his own damn beaters. Neville rolled his eyes. Maybe Malfoy's been slightly less revolting this year, but I'm not going to get excited about snakes eating their own. I'm just here to take my nudes, and I thought that's why you were here too. Hermione remembered her life optimization organization plan. You're right, Neville. I have been a little distracted. She leaned back on the sofa and looked at him thoughtfully. We should organize a nude study club, Neville groaned. Oh no. He put his head in his hands. I talk too much. We'll call it Pupil Organization to Review Nude. P-O-R-N? Porn? Neville sputtered, raising his hands. He's got porn? Ginny asked alertly from her table of shots. Hermione, Neville said. She wants to start a study group for nudes. With porn? Ron asked. Sort me out. Pupil Organization to Review Nudes, Neville said, grinning. This is really needed, Hermione said stubbornly. We 8th years came back to sit for our nudes after all, and we should invite all the houses to join. The whole room groaned. Not again. It's not a terrible idea, Ginny said. For your 8th years anyways. No study guides, Ron pronounced, and the room cheered. Hermione was appalled. You can't prepare for nudes without study guides. Oh, I can, and I will, Ron said. I'm not joining porn if there are study guides. It's the Pupils' Organization to Review Nudes, Hermione cried. Whatever. Can we stop talking about studying now? Ron asked. Would you rather talk about Quidditch? Hermione answered nastily. Down, girl, Neville whispered. Hermione flushed. All the talk of nudes and Quidditch killed what small buzz the common room had, and people began drifting upstairs to their dorms. Hermione had other plans, however, and after a quick visit upstairs to stuff the Marauders map in her jeans pocket, she returned to the common room to catch Ginny and Neville talking earnestly on the sofa. This can't be good. I can't believe you, Hermione, Ginny hissed. You hexed them? They deserved it, Hermione said, sitting in the armchair opposite. Ginny frowned. You need to be careful with this Malfoy thing. What thing? Neville asked. Hermione, you told me you two weren't. We're not, she said, glaring at them both. Maybe you're not, but there's definitely a thing, Ginny said. He winked at her before the game today, Neville said. There's a lot of tension there, Ginny said. There's a lot of tension between you and Blaise too, Hermione said. Neville groaned. I just want to stay out of it all, he said. Everyone's gone sparse these days. Ron, Dennis, the two of you, McGonagall. I won't let anyone else take the fall for those hexes, Hermione said. I'll tell McGonagall myself. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Ginny said. You could be expelled. Are you kidding me? Neville asked. Expel Hermione Granger? She might have to if the parents make a stink, Hermione said. Well, I've had it, Ginny said, yawning. I'm exhausted. I was up at 6 this morning drawing up Quidditch plays, and we still lost the damn game. We talk about the hexing and the pawn tomorrow." She stood up, swaying slightly. "Pupil organization to review Newt," Hermione said. Ginny just grinned and yawned again. "Good night," she said, heading upstairs. Neville stood as well. "I'm knackered too," he said. "You getting some sleep?" "I will, I promise," Hermione said. "I'm just going to sit by the fire for a bit." Her friend looked down at her, his face concerned. "Be careful, Hermione. Malfoy is still trouble, you know." "I know," she said, staring into the fire. "Merlin, do I ever know?" Chapter notes. Some readers have noted how badly Kingsley Shacklebolt behaved in the last chapter, and I agree. He's under great pressure from the Ministry, but that's no excuse. Kingsley gets a little character arc in this story, so we'll see what happens. To be continued. Thank you for listening to The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon, read by LMXMabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on AO3, YouTube, or Spotify.